If you haven't seen Hungry Planet, it's an interesting book. They look at families from around the world, and they have stories about it, but there's always pictures of what's a week's worth of food look like in your family. And so this is an American family. There's some broccoli and potatoes and bananas. There's a few unprocessed foods, but just about everything else is in a package. A fair amount of high fructose corn syrup here. So the typical American is not eating a lot of whole food. In contrast, the sustainable approach would be concerned with how do we make sure we have healthy soils, and usually by manures and cover crops, would trap the nitrogen, etc. The food, would tend to be whole. This is obviously not local since we have bananas, but more minimally processed foods, or at least a lot less processed and a lot less additives than what the typical food system. Industrial narrow genetic base, monoculture, separation of crops and livestock. So we specialize. I'll grow the corn, you raise the animals. Standardized production systems. The latest thing is cloning of animals. You can't get more standardized than that. So we clone animals. What's the pressure to clone animals? So that steak is the same. Doesn't matter which animal you cut that steak from, it's the same steak. Standardized. Doesn't matter where you go to McDonald's, it's the same McBurger. Sustainable, it's a broadgenetic-based polyculture, so mixed cultures, integration of crops and livestock, which is obviously how it used to be, and locally adapted production systems. So it's site-specific. It's not so what we grow in Colorado is going to be different from what we grow somewhere else. So in Iowa, corn from across the horizon. We bring feed to the animals in feedlots. We control it, so every animal gets the same feed, same corn, soy, antibiotic combination. It makes them grow fast. We know what's going to happen. We have consistent growth rates, consistent outcomes, versus a mixed system where you have a variety of diverse crops. A lot more work. Can't run a machine through here or harvest. You're going to have hand harvesting. Bacon on pasture. This is actually from Polyface Farms, this picture, which is in Virginia, where the cattle have already been through this field, and then he brings in the chickens. After the cattle have gone, the chickens kind of control the insects from the cattle, but it's a lot more work. You got to move the little houses, move the fence, etc. I just have one slide on biodiversity and a couple comments. This is in less than 100 years, the number of varietals, which is represented by the red line, in 1903 versus 1994, which is the green. How many varietals have been lost? And just these crops, but if we looked at potatoes, it would be even more dramatic. If we looked at apples, it would even be more dramatic. And some of these are still available as seeds and seed banks, but a lot of these are gone, never to be seen again. And so what? Okay, so we picked the varietals that give the biggest yield in the shortest period of time. We picked the varietals that have the best shelf life, so we can harvest them and ship them across the country, and they're still okay 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later. But several problems. One, and for example here at this particular point in Bangladesh, 67% of the wheat is one strain. So what happens when a pest comes in? A particular insect, a particular disease that strain is susceptible for. Bangladesh is going to have a lot of problems. And this has happened before. The Irish potato famine in the 70s in the southeastern United States, corn was wiped out because there was 1 or 2 strains that were very susceptible to a particular disease. And right now there's a disease hitting the wheat farmers that basically wipes out the crop. If you have more biodiversity, you have more resistance to disease and pests. You also get more, it's more robust, you get more yield if you have more biodiversity. Farm size, as we said, global tends to go large scale, monoculture. If you look worldwide at the farm size versus total output, and output is different from yield. Yield is how much of a single crop you get per acre, how much corn per acre. Right? And obviously a monoculture produces a lot more corn per acre or a lot more soybeans per acre than a mixed cropping system. But if you look at total output, the total food that comes from the system, the smaller scale mixed farms produce more food. And so the argument that, oh, we can't feed people unless we go large scale, just isn't really supported by the statistics. This particular number 2 kind of represents the United States or developed countries. That middle size is the most productive, and that's the one that's getting squeezed. In the third world, the small size is the most productive. So as we kind of talk the third world into going to our system of large-scale monoculture, we're actually reducing food output. And the industrial model, the farmers is supposed to be a businessman. It's not. Farming is a business, not a way of life. Sustainable tends to look at the farm and farm traditions in the positive light. It's a way of life. And the problem in the United States is the average farmer, one of the problems, is over 55. So a lot of small-scale production in this country probably is not a solution in the short term because who's going to be growing it? There's not that many farmers anymore. Okay, so environmental, couple environmental issues. This is a statement from the EPA when they were talking about CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, but it extrapolates to large-scale operations in general. Current farming practices are responsible for 70% of the pollution in the nation's rivers and streams, mostly from fertilizer runoff and pesticide runoff. So what does that lead to? As the fertilizer runoff hits the rivers and it concentrates and it gets to the mouths of rivers, in this case the Gulf of Mexico, from the Mississippi River, you have these large dead zones, which are from eutrophication. So the fertilizer causes the algae to bloom, you get lots of algae, the algae dies, sucks up the oxygen. There's 150 of these worldwide. This one is larger than New Jersey. And where are some of the richest seafood places? At the mouths of river. So here are the places where we get the most productive seafood are the very places we're killing off with agricultural runoff. Mostly phosphorus. Water is a huge issue. In the western states, we use about 8% of our fresh water for agriculture. And I have a note here, not that we have a lot of Green Revolution crops necessarily, but one of the problems with the Green Revolution is that it's very water intensive. If water starts to dry up or become limited, then we have problems with the Green Revolution crops. And it's not livestock. Livestock is a small percentage. It's the water needed to grow the grain and forage for the livestock. This is a slide I borrowed from Jessica Davis at CSU. 2 different studies, but correspond pretty well. And this is gallons of water per pound of food. And so plants don't take as much, vegetables not a lot, grains 100 to 200, but as we get into the animals, it jumps dramatically. And again, it's not the animals drinking the water, it's the water to grow the feed for the animals. So the corn and soybean, etc. For wheat, it's 1,000 tons of water to get 1 ton of wheat. So agriculture is not only dependent on oil, which we'll look at in a second, but it's very dependent on water and irrigation, and it's a problem. This is availability of fresh water in 2000. The darker the blue, the better. I'm kind of surprised that Australia is so blue because they've had a long-term drought down there. But notice this part of the world. So Saharan and some part of sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, India, limited water. The aquifers in the Middle East are drying up. So, and they're totally dependent on irrigation there. No rainfall. The aquifers in the Midwest are drying up. They're going down faster than they're being replenished. Okay, so we're going to be faced with some of these issues as well. Different parts of the world, and this lower income, middle income, et cetera, is really countries that are lower income versus middle income. But across the board, agriculture being the darker blue, across the board, if you look at water use by sector, it's agriculture is the dominant use of water. And what are we doing? I meant to mention that on the earlier slide.